Story 1. The Refrigerator Man. The Yorkshire night was cold enough to sting the skin through layers of wool and synthetic insulation. Elliot Shaw's eyes were rimmed with fatigue, veins dark and brittle under pale skin, the result of months of relentless insomnia. His freelance programming gigs paid well, but the price was sleepless nights and the gnawing loneliness of small apartments that smelled faintly of instant noodles and burnt coffee. He gripped the steering wheel of his aging Ford Fiesta tighter, eyes straining through the thick fog rolling across the S64. The headlights pierced only a few meters ahead, the rest of the highway swallowed in a milky void that turned familiar signs into ghostly silhouettes. Elliot checked the clock. 2:17 a.m. Hunger gnawed at him like an untamed animal. He'd skipped dinner to debug a stubborn script, and now his stomach protested violently. Somewhere ahead, a blinking neon sign promised salvation. One stop 24H. It was the only convenience store for miles in either direction. Relief surged, a momentary lift in his otherwise bone-deep fatigue. He eased the car off the road into the gravel parking lot, crunching over frost-hardened stones. The air smelled of diesel and damp earth, a peculiar but oddly comforting scent at this hour. Inside, the store smelled of plastic, disinfectant, and the faint sweetness of packaged pastries. Shelves glimmered under harsh fluorescent lights, almost sterile in the quiet emptiness. Elliot's eyes scanned the aisles for something to satisfy his hunger. Canned soup, instant noodles, a microwavable sandwich. But something at the back corner made him freeze. A man sat on the cold linoleum, his legs folded awkwardly beneath him, his body pressed close to the refrigerator that hummed and glowed softly. The jacket he wore was brown and worn, fabric frayed at the cuffs, shoulders slumped like it had been carried through decades of hardship. But it was his posture, his presence, that made Elliot pause. The man's face was almost invisible, buried in the cool metal of the fridge, whispering continuously. The voice was low, muttering words that Elliot couldn't catch, more like fragments of a broken incantation than coherent speech. Elliot took a cautious step forward, curiosity mixing with a sudden, inexplicable unease. When he leaned slightly, trying to get a better look, the man's eyes snapped open. And they were terrifying. Huge, impossibly wide, glistening with a wet intensity that reflected the fluorescent light in a way that seemed unnatural. His lips quivered, parting slightly as a thin line of dark crimson seeped from the corner of his mouth. Elliot's heart clenched violently. He had seen exhaustion, even starvation, in the eyes of strangers before. But this was something else entirely. There was hunger here, yes, but of a different sort. The man lifted his head with a sudden, unnatural speed. His gaze locked on Elliot's like a predator's. It was almost as if he had been waiting for this very moment, for Elliot to intrude into his private ritual. The hum of the refrigerator and the sterile light seemed to vanish, leaving only the intensity of the stare. Elliot felt the floor shift beneath his feet, his limbs numb with panic. Without thinking, he turned, almost tripping over a discarded cardboard box as he fled toward the door. The night air hit him like a slap, cold and dense. Elliot's foot pressed the accelerator in blind desperation, tires crunching over gravel before merging onto the slick highway. His breathing was ragged, and adrenaline blurred his vision. Then, from the corner of his eye, he caught movement. The man. He was outside. He had somehow moved, though Elliot had not seen him stand. The figure leapt onto an old, rusting pickup truck parked near the highway. A phantom clinging to metal and shadow. Elliot's pulse pounded as the truck roared behind him. At first, he thought it a trick of his panicked mind, but the next moments confirmed his worst fears. The truck swerved, deliberately colliding with the back of his Fiesta. Metal screamed, paint scraped against paint. Elliot swerved to avoid a more severe impact, tires spinning on frost-slick asphalt. His speedometer climbed past 140 kilometers per hour as he struggled to maintain control. A sudden jolt, a miscalculated swerve, the Fiesta spun in a chaotic circle, headlights slicing through the fog in arcs that felt like the strobe of some macabre disco. Elliot's hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, his breath misting in the freezing air. With a desperate lunge, he stared into the oncoming lane, hoping to evade the relentless pursuit. The truck attempted to follow, but a semi-trailer loomed ahead. The resulting collision was a cacophony of screeching metal and splintering wood. The truck was crushed sideways by the impact, the sound jagged and screaming in Elliot's ears. When the dust of the encounter settled, Elliot's heart still hammering in his throat, he realized he had survived. The lights of distant towns began to pierce the fog, faint but promising, guiding him to safety. However, the horror was far from over. Reviewing security footage later, Elliot could not believe his eyes. The truck had been empty. There was no driver, no man in the brown jacket. Only the torn, blood-stained remnants of the coat remained, flapping weakly in the cold night wind. It was as if he had pursued Elliot not as a man, but as a shadow-given form, a hunger made corporeal and relentless. The highway stretched out ahead like a silver ribbon swallowed by fog, each streetlight a dim, untrustworthy star guiding Elliot's trembling hands. The memory of the man in the brown jacket clawed at his mind, refusing to release its grip. He kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shadow melting into the mist. But at first there was only emptiness. His pulse gradually slowed, each mile of asphalt a temporary reprieve. But an inexplicable instinct urged him not to relax. Danger was not done with him yet. Then, a movement appeared in the distance, a flicker of headlights that didn't belong to any car he recognized. At first, he thought it might be another vehicle on the deserted 64. But as it grew nearer, Elliot realized the approaching truck was the rusted pickup he had seen outside the store. His heart lodged in his throat. How? He had seen the security footage. There had been no driver, no man. Only the blood-soaked coat left behind like some cruel punctuation. And yet, here it was, crawling through the fog behind him, silent, patient, relentless. The truck began to ram the rear of Elliot's car, first lightly, then with increasing force. The metal groaned under each impact, the sound echoing across the empty highway like a monstrous heartbeat. Elliot swerved violently to the left, narrowly avoiding the icy shoulder. He could feel each collision in his bones, the vibrations sending shivers of panic down his spine. Adrenaline burned like fire through his veins as he realized the pursuit was no longer just a threat. It was a hunt. He remembered an exit sign coming up, a small turnoff that led to a service road running parallel to the main highway. If he could just make it there, he might have a chance to lose whatever terror was following him. His hands gripped the wheel with desperate intensity, knuckles white, muscles aching with strain. He accelerated, tires screeching on the frost-coated asphalt, heart hammering a frenetic rhythm in his ears. Then came the impact that sent his car spinning. A misaligned ram from the pickup truck struck the Fiesta at the rear left corner. The car pirouetted across the road, fishtailing with terrifying momentum, headlights sweeping across the fog in dizzying arcs. Elliot fought to maintain control, his mind screaming in a mix of fear and instinct. The world tilted violently, the fog and the lights and the sound of metal colliding merging into a single, incomprehensible chaos. Finally, instinct overpowered panic. He stared sharply, pushing the car into the opposite lane, narrowly avoiding an oncoming truck. The truck clipped the pickup instead, the resulting screeching impact reverberating like a scream. Elliot's body shook as he fought the steering wheel, adrenaline burning through every nerve. The rusted vehicle careened off into the fog, the sound of crumpling metal echoing in the empty night. For a moment, he allowed himself a shaky breath. He had survived. The nearest town was still a good 15 kilometers away. But Elliot drove as if propelled by some desperate, primal need. The fog had begun to thin, revealing a landscape of frost-coated fields and skeletal trees. It was quiet now, eerily so, the kind of silence that seemed unnatural after the cacophony of pursuit. Yet, despite the apparent calm, an unease rooted deep in his chest, a creeping certainty that he was not alone. He glanced again at the rearview mirror and froze. The brown coat was back. Or perhaps not the coat exactly, but the shape that had worn it. It clung to the rusted pickup, impossibly fast, moving with an unnatural fluidity. Elliot's stomach knotted. This wasn't human. It couldn't be. Logic shattered under the weight of instinctual terror. He pressed the accelerator harder, but the pickup remained on his tail, relentless as the shadows themselves. The fog began to shift, swirling around the headlights in strange, almost deliberate patterns, and Elliot felt as if the world itself were conspiring to trap him. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet every rational thought warned him that he might never truly escape. He remembered the footage, the coat, soaked in dried blood, and nothing else. He realized with sickening clarity that the man had never been there in any conventional sense. He had been something else entirely, something that defied the physical rules of the world. He reached the crest of a hill, the road dipping down toward a narrow bridge crossing a frozen stream. His eyes darted side to side, searching for anything that could give him an edge. Then, on the bridge's edge, a guardrail glinted in the mist. A desperate, irrational plan formed in his mind. If he could force the pickup into the guardrail, even for a moment, it might buy him just enough time to vanish into the back roads leading to the town. Elliot braked suddenly, pulling hard to the right. The tires squealed in protest as the car skidded toward the guardrail. At the last second, he yanked the wheel back, swinging the car around in a tight arc. The pickup collided with the guardrail instead, metal shrieking in protest, spinning off the bridge and vanishing into the fog beyond. Elliot's chest heaved as he tried to comprehend what had just occurred. The remainder of the drive to town passed in a tense blur. He didn't dare glance behind him again, fearing what he might see. The streets were empty, the glow of street lamps dim in the early morning fog. When he finally reached a 24-hour petrol station, his hands shook so violently that he could barely remove the keys from the ignition. He parked haphazardly, the engine ticking as it cooled, and stumbled inside, seeking the comfort of human presence, of fluorescent lights and mundane normalcy. Later, reviewing the footage from his car's dashcam and the store security cameras, Elliot found himself confronted with a truth more horrifying than any chase. The man, the figure, the brown coat, it had never entered the truck. There was only the coat, mangled, bloody, and abandoned in the driver's seat. No face, no eyes, no physical form. It was as if the entity had existed only to terrorize him in the brief moments it chose, disappearing whenever any rational observer might verify its presence. The store employees, half asleep and indifferent, had no recollection of the man. Must have been some vagrant, one muttered, adjusting his cap. Nothing new in these parts. But Elliot knew better. He had seen what he had seen. He had felt it in every nerve, every heartbeat, every frozen breath. That night, he realized the world was not a place of pure logic or safety. There were spaces where something else existed, waiting for the right moment to materialize, to test the limits of human fear and endurance. By the time Elliot returned to his apartment, the first light of dawn was struggling to break over the Yorkshire horizon. He tried to shake the images from his mind, the whispering voice, the impossibly wide eyes, the cold metal pressed to his cheek in memory. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and shallow, haunted by dreams of brown fabric dripping with blood, eyes that watched without blinking, waiting just beyond the threshold of perception. He would drive again, inevitably. Work demanded it, life compelled it. But the memory of that night lingered like frost, coating every thought with unease. The brown coat had become a symbol, a reminder that kindness, curiosity, or mere inattention could expose one to horrors lurking beneath the mundane. And that even in a world illuminated by neon lights and the hum of refrigeration, monsters existed, not always fully formed, not always visible, but ever present for those who wandered too close. Days passed, though Elliot could not tell precisely how many. His mind had become a fog, a liminal space between wakefulness and exhaustion, haunted by shadows of that night. He returned to his routines mechanically, logging into freelance projects, sipping bitter instant coffee, and staring at the computer screen for hours. But the world had subtly changed. Color seemed muted, sounds sharper. A chair creaking in the next room could provoke a spike of fear, and every gust of wind against the window whispered promises of unseen eyes. He avoided the 64 entirely, taking longer routes to mundane errands, even at the cost of inconvenience. Friends noticed his agitation. A simple question about his weekend would send him into tangents about traffic accidents or odd people in convenience stores. Elliot's explanations were fragmentary and cautious, avoiding the word man, the word pickup, the brown coat. They laughed nervously at his apparent paranoia, offering little comfort, little acknowledgement. And yet, deep in his chest, he knew it was not imagination. He had survived by chance, or perhaps by something else entirely. One evening, 3 nights after the encounter, he attempted to review the footage from the dashcam again. The video was static-laden, each frame flickering like an old film, but he noticed a detail he had not before: subtle disturbances in the light, the faint wavering of air around the abandoned coat in the driver's seat, almost as if the fabric had been alive for a fraction of a second before the camera could fully capture it. His stomach churned, a visceral response to a memory he could almost, but not entirely, repress. He had seen the impossible. Sleep became impossible once more. At first, Elliot tried the usual remedies: warm tea, counting exercises, deep breathing. But each night brought dreams, or perhaps visitations, that blurred the line between memory and reality. In these visions, the man in the brown jacket waited in the glow of neon lights, whispering words just beyond comprehension. Sometimes he appeared pressed against the refrigerator in some anonymous store, sometimes lurking beside Elliot's parked car, invisible until the moment of recognition. The whispering voice carried a cadence Elliot could not place, half English, half something older than the hills of Yorkshire. In daylight, the memories haunted him less tangibly. The streets of his town were busy with mundane life, cars honking, shopkeepers calling to each other, children laughing. Yet in his peripheral vision, he sometimes glimpsed the brown fabric, twisting unnaturally, shadows where none should be. He would turn abruptly, heart leaping, but find only the familiar landscape of pavement and brick. The line between reality and hallucination was fraying. He began leaving lights on overnight, doors locked multiple times, a small knife under the pillow. The fear was not of death, he realized, but of the intrusion, the inevitability of being seen again. Then, one evening, he noticed something even more unnerving. The hum of his refrigerator at home had changed. It was subtle at first, a deeper vibration beneath the normal whirring, almost as if it were breathing. Elliot stood in the kitchen, staring at the appliance, and thought he saw the faint outline of a figure in the reflection of the polished fridge door, broad shoulders, a brown coat, the suggestion of eyes glinting back at him. He stumbled backward, heart pounding, and fled the apartment, running into the cold night. But when he returned moments later with his trembling hands gripping a hammer, there was nothing, just the ordinary hum of machinery. The final straw came when he received a delivery at his apartment, a simple parcel wrapped in brown paper with no return address. He tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was the coat, the same brown, frayed, and bloodstained. There was no man, no note, no explanation. It simply sat there, folded neatly, as if left for him to discover. The absurdity and terror collided in his mind, and a horrifying understanding settled in. The entity did not need a body to haunt him. The coat alone was enough, a vessel of presence and memory, a signal that the night had not released him from its grip. Elliot's attempts at rationalization failed. He considered police intervention. But how could one explain a blood-soaked coat that appeared and disappeared, that had attacked and vanished without leaving a trace? How could one describe an encounter where the laws of physics and reason were broken, leaving only fear and the lingering sense of predation? Friends and authorities would label him insane. He realized the truth. Some things in the night were beyond explanation, beyond containment, and only the careful acknowledgement of their presence might stave off total terror. He began recording everything: notes, photographs, timestamps, a diary detailing the slightest irregularity in sound, shadow, and temperature. Each scribble reinforced the sense of vigilance, each photograph a talisman against forgetting. Yet, deep down, he knew it could not protect him from the entity itself. The brown coat, the whispers, the eyes, they were independent of rational boundaries. They had chosen him once, and he could not unchoose them. On one particularly frigid evening, Elliot returned from the grocery store to find his car hood smeared with frost patterns that resembled eyes. The lights of the town reflected off the crystalline eyes in a mocking shimmer. He dared not approach at first, fearing the pickup, or worse, the man himself might return. Yet as he neared, the frost melted, revealing nothing but the ordinary steel beneath. The fear, however, did not melt. It lingered, a living thing feeding on his awareness. Weeks turned into months. Elliot never returned to the S64. The memory of the night, the pursuit, the collisions, the impossibility of the truck etched itself into his psyche like frost into metal. But even as life resumed a fragile semblance of normality, he could not fully escape. The brown coat remained a specter, occasionally glimpsed at the corner of his eye, occasionally heard whispering in the hum of electronics or the draft of an unlatched window. His life became a careful choreography around the unseen, a constant negotiation with the incomprehensible. And in the quietest hours, when the world seemed to pause, he realized the truth that had been whispering all along. Night held dangers beyond human comprehension, and even the smallest kindness, lingering too long to observe, curiosity too boldly exercised, could summon the unimaginable. The world had not ended, but his perception of it had. The brown coat was a reminder, a lingering warning, and Elliot understood that his survival had been an accident, a narrow sliver of fortune in a night ruled by forces indifferent to human reason. The final image burned into his mind: the pickup abandoned, the blood-stained coat fluttering weakly in the cold Yorkshire wind. A shadow with no form but with intent, waiting, always waiting. Elliot knew he had escaped death, but he had not escaped the watch. Somewhere, somehow, the entity waited for another lapse, another intrusion, another moment of trust or curiosity. And in that knowledge lay the knife edge of fear. That night, that encounter, was not an anomaly. It was a beginning. Even years later, when Elliot told the story to no one but himself, the recollection brought a cold sweat and the involuntary shiver of memory. The brown coat remained a symbol of the night's cruelty and the fragile boundary between safety and terror. He never touched another refrigerator at 2 a.m., never lingered in convenience stores alone, never allowed curiosity to outweigh caution. Because he had learned the hard truth. The night does not forgive, and kindness, or hesitation, can be a blade with two edges. Story 2. The Red Hatchback Trap. The night in Bavaria was thick and heavy, the kind of summer darkness that seems to stick to the skin like sweat and shadow. Nathan Cole's van hummed along the narrow, winding stretches of B2R, headlights slicing through the dense black of the forest, yet revealing nothing more than the occasional glimmer of road signs and the silhouettes of ancient pines. He had been driving for hours, delivering high-value computer components to a VIP client, each package a delicate puzzle of circuits, memory modules, and motherboards that demanded care and attention. The air inside the van was warm and stale, the result of a long day behind the wheel. Nathan's mind wandered, half focused on the road, half replaying memories from his military days in Germany, months of tactical drills, long nights of vigilance, and the strange combination of boredom and alertness that comes from extended hours alone in hostile environments. The sound of his own breathing, the occasional snap of tires over gravel or uneven asphalt, and the distant rustle of forest creatures were the only constants. At precisely 1:03 a.m., a glimmer of red caught his eye, a sudden break in the monotony of trees and asphalt. A Fiat, small and battered, sat abandoned on the roadside, hazard lights blinking in a rhythm that seemed almost frantic. Nathan slowed, instinct mixed with caution, scanning for signs of danger. And then he saw her. A young woman with long blonde hair, standing beside the vehicle with one arm raised, a pleading gesture illuminated by the flickering red lights. She looked vulnerable, desperate. Tears streaked her face, her dress clinging damply to her form from the humidity. Nathan's instincts battled with caution. He had been trained to assess threats, to anticipate deception, to assume that every encounter on the road in the dead of night might carry risk. Yet something compelled him. Perhaps it was the plain humanity of a person in need, or the unshakable memory of loneliness from his own solitary hours on the road. He pulled the van to a stop, leaving enough space between them to maneuver if necessary, but close enough to offer assistance. "Need a lift?" he asked, voice steady but careful. She nodded rapidly, sniffling, explaining in a voice quivering with exhaustion that her car had died and that she needed to get to the nearest gas station. Nathan hesitated only for a heartbeat, then unlocked the passenger door. He motioned her in, silently reminding himself to keep one hand near the Glock tucked under the seat. The Walther P99 had been retired from active duty, but it had long been part of his reflexive safety measures. The first few minutes were uneventful, almost mundane. The woman introduced herself in stuttering, relieved words, claiming her car had broken down and that she was anxious to reach civilization. Nathan maintained a casual, steady pace, monitoring the road and forest shadows with trained attention. But as soon as they passed the point of no return, the atmosphere shifted. She began to giggle, or rather, cackle, a strange, guttural sound that did not match the desperation he had witnessed moments ago. The van vibrated subtly as Nathan tensed, hand brushing the holstered firearm beneath the seat. The woman's laughter escalated, and then, without warning, two men leapt from the trunk of the abandoned Fiat. Dressed entirely in black, faces obscured by masks, they brandished axes and began accelerating on motorcycles, engines snarling like predators. The first axe flew in a wide arc, embedding itself with a jarring impact into the windshield of Nathan's van, sending shards of glass raining over the dashboard. Instinct took over. Nathan stomped the brake, slammed the gear into reverse, and fired a warning shot into the air. The woman screamed, not in terror, but as if part of the chaos itself, then leaned forward, biting into his wrist with feral intensity. Pain and adrenaline collided, and he flung the door open, shoving her out into the asphalt. The tires skidded over the dark, uneven surface, catching in loose gravel as she hit the ground. The motorcycle swerved, engines screaming as they pursued. Nathan slammed the van forward, tires gripping the road as best they could, and a blur of black leather and steel passed by, one rider falling under the weight of his own momentum as the van ran over him. A sickening crunch resonated, an instant confirmation of injury. The remaining assailant was relentless, weaving around trees, launching axes with precision born from sinister experience. Sweat dripped down Nathan's face as he focused on the only path available, the road to the gas station. Every muscle in his body tightened, reflexes honed from years of military discipline taking control. He monitored the forest edges, calculated the physics of each potential collision, and tried to anticipate the next throw. The van's tires screamed on the asphalt, sending clouds of dust and gravel into the night, but the remaining attacker remained unnervingly persistent. Finally, headlights appeared, the glow of the gas station, a small oasis of light in the oppressive darkness. Nathan steered the van toward the pumps, tires slipping slightly on the loose gravel as he came to a halt. Heart racing, he jumped out to assess the situation. The forest was silent again, except for the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional birds settling for the night. His attention was drawn to the passenger seat. A small package, previously unnoticed, had appeared inside the van. Trembling, he reached for it and discovered 3 leather bindings, a small vial labeled with warning symbols, and a Polaroid photograph. His blood ran cold. The Polaroid was of himself, captured while sleeping in his own bedroom. The sense of violation, the realization that the attack had been orchestrated and monitored with intimate precision, left him staggering. Whoever, or whatever, had orchestrated this nightmare was watching, always. And their methods were calculated to exploit not only fear but also trust. Nathan understood that this encounter was no mere robbery or road rage. It was a demonstration, a trap, and perhaps a warning. The forest seemed to lean closer, darkness pressing against the bright lights of the gas station. Every instinct screamed that he was not yet safe, that the figures in black could re-emerge from the shadows at any moment. But the van remained motionless, the package harmlessly inert on the seat. Nathan exhaled, a long, shaky breath that carried both relief and lingering tension. He had survived, narrowly. But the night's lessons were clear. The road offered no guarantees, and even an act of simple decency could trigger consequences beyond imagination. The forest seemed to close in around Nathan as he gripped the wheel, pulse hammering like a drum in his chest. The humid night air pressed against the van's windows, and the faint smell of engine oil and damp pine filled the cabin. His knuckles were white, his breathing shallow, but his mind worked with lethal clarity. This was no ordinary road incident, no simple criminal encounter. Everything, the timing, the placement of the woman, the sudden emergence of the attackers, was precise, calculated, designed to trap him. He glanced briefly in the passenger seat, expecting to see the girl sprawled or unconscious. But she was gone. Only the faint echo of her laughter, unnervingly human yet tinged with something feral, lingered in his ears. Nathan's instinct screamed that she had been part of the trap, a lure engineered to draw him into the forest's twisted game. The Polaroid he had discovered earlier confirmed his suspicions. Whoever orchestrated this attack had studied him, monitored his habits, and manipulated his natural decency. Suddenly, movement flashed in his peripheral vision. The second attacker, still clad in black, accelerated on his motorcycle, engine growling like a predator. He swung the axe in a wide, calculated arc, the blade catching the headlights as it flew through the air. Nathan yanked the wheel to the left, tires skidding over loose gravel, narrowly avoiding the deadly throw. The sound of shattering glass from the van's rearview mirror filled the air, mingling with the echoing growl of the motorcycle engine. Adrenaline surged, sharpening Nathan's senses. He slammed the van into reverse, tires biting into the uneven asphalt, and fired a single warning shot into the air. The sound cracked the stillness like a whip, startling birds from the treetops. The attacker hesitated only briefly, then rode forward with renewed ferocity. Nathan's hands moved instinctively, adjusting gears, applying the brake just enough to control the van's momentum, calculating every motion to exploit the road's curves and his vehicle's limitations. The forest was a blur of shadow and light as he maneuvered through narrow bends, tires squealing against the asphalt, leaves scratching against the undercarriage. He could feel the presence of the attacker behind him, relentless, a predator perfectly matched to his every maneuver. Nathan's military training surfaced in full force, memory and reflexes guiding him with precision honed over years of drills, night operations, and a constant awareness of unseen threats. Yet even the most disciplined mind could not fully anticipate the chaos engineered by those who had designed this trap. Suddenly, a third figure emerged from the roadside shadows. A second motorcycle, axis poised. Both attackers moved with a disturbing synchronicity, coordinating their strikes to box him in. Nathan ducked instinctively as another axe collided with the windshield, the metal screaming under the impact. His vision blurred, adrenaline constricting his throat, yet he remained painfully aware of every detail. The gravel under the tires, the edge of the forest encroaching on the road, the reflective glint of axes in the headlights. The van lurched forward, tires skidding dangerously as Nathan attempted a sudden, sharp turn onto a narrower path running parallel to the main road. One attacker followed closely, swerving expertly around the bend, but the second motorcycle struggled to maintain balance on the uneven surface. Nathan seized the advantage, flooring the accelerator, and felt the van leap forward over a small ridge. Gravel and dust exploded behind him as he sped down the path, the forest blurring into streaks of black and green. Suddenly, the girl reappeared, standing at a fork in the path. She raised her hands again, tears streaked across her face, her laugh twisting into a grotesque imitation of innocence. Nathan slammed the brakes and swerved, narrowly avoiding her. The attackers hesitated for a fraction of a second, their focus momentarily fractured, and Nathan seized the opportunity. He floored the accelerator once more, tires gripping the rough path as he barreled toward the distant glow of the gas station. The chase had been designed to disorient, to create panic and force mistakes. Nathan was acutely aware that one wrong move could mean death, or worse, captivity. Every instinct screamed that the attackers were not ordinary criminals. They were predators who thrived on control, on fear, on the precision of a trap executed flawlessly. And yet, he could not afford hesitation. The van's engine roared, tires screeching on gravel, each heartbeat synchronized with the van's motion, each calculation a measure of life and death. Finally, the lights of the gas station appeared, a small heaven in the oppressive night. Nathan swerved around the pumps, tires kicking up gravel, and slammed the van into a makeshift parking spot near the illuminated entrance. He jumped out, scanning the surrounding darkness with a practiced eye. The forest beyond the clearing was silent now, the motorcycles gone, or perhaps merely concealed in shadow. His gaze returned to the van's interior, where the package he had previously discovered now seemed almost mocking in its simplicity. The leather ties, the vial, the Polaroid photograph. The Polaroid still showed him sleeping in his own bedroom, a violation so intimate it struck him with nausea and disbelief. Nathan understood, with chilling clarity, that the attackers had observed him, studied him, and orchestrated every detail to exploit his instincts. The girl had been a lure, the forest a maze, the access a test of reflex and judgment. The entire event had been engineered not merely for harm, but as a demonstration of control, a cruel lesson in trust and vigilance. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the rapid beating of his heart. The station's lights reflected off the van's polished surface, revealing nothing unusual. No marks, no shadows, no sign of the attackers. But Nathan knew better. Whoever had set this trap was watching still, their presence felt in the smallest details. A shifted leaf, a lingering echo of laughter, the faint disturbance of air in the cooling night. The trap had been partially successful, exploiting his natural decency, but Nathan had survived. As he sat on the curb, clutching the Polaroid, he realized the true cost of his choice. In the dead of night, the world was not simply governed by morality or reason. Acts of kindness could be exploited, trust weaponized, and instinct manipulated. The forest had taught him that the balance between decency and survival was razor-thin, that a moment's hesitation could be fatal. He could never unsee what he had seen, never unknowingly step into a trap again. The night stretched on, oppressive and watchful, as Nathan secured the van and approached the gas station's interior. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the cashier, half asleep and indifferent, offered no recognition of the events outside. It was as if the forest and the darkness had existed in a separate plane, where ordinary people were blind to the mechanics of predation and control. Nathan understood, with bitter clarity, that survival required constant vigilance, that kindness in the night could become a blade with two edges. The sun had not yet risen, but the oppressive darkness of the black forest had begun to lift, revealing the narrow roads, twisted trees, and thick undergrowth that had surrounded Nathan only hours before. He sat inside the van, clutching the Polaroid, the vial, and the leather bindings like talismans against the memory. Each object was a grim reminder of what had happened, the tangible residue of a night engineered to exploit both his skill and his decency. Nathan's hands trembled as he replayed the events over and over in his mind. The girl, the motorcycles, the access, each sequence meticulously orchestrated. He could see every movement, every throw, every reaction, as if the forest itself had been a predator, bending the laws of reality to trap him. It wasn't luck, he realized. The attackers had known him, studied his habits, and manipulated them to draw him into this nightmarish choreography. When he finally approached the van, preparing to leave for a nearby town, he noticed something unsettling. The package he had examined earlier was no longer on the seat. In its place was a small envelope, sealed and unmarked. Trembling, Nathan opened it. Inside, there was a single note written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "We watch what you protect. Remember, the kind-hearted are prey in the night." The words carried no signature, no explanation, but their meaning was clear. This was no random act. It was a message, a warning, and a testament to the meticulousness of the attackers. Even as daylight grew stronger, Nathan felt the forest's shadow lingering. Each sound, the hum of the van's engine, the rustle of leaves, even his own heartbeat, felt amplified, imbued with the potential for danger. He drove cautiously, eyes darting to the tree line, anticipating movement that may never come. The road stretched ahead, seemingly ordinary, yet Nathan could not shake the sensation of being observed, of something waiting just beyond vision, testing his vigilance. That night's events reshaped his perception of trust and decency. Acts that had once felt natural, offering help to a stranded stranger, slowing down to check on a vehicle, even making eye contact in the dark, were now weighted with possibility. Nathan realized that his instinct to help, honed over years of military discipline and human empathy, had been weaponized against him. In the dead of night, there was no guarantee that kindness would be rewarded or even tolerated. Sometimes it could trigger the precise opposite. The small Bavarian town that Nathan reached was a fragile sanctuary, fluorescent lights reflecting off the damp pavement, store signs flickering as if uncertain in the waking hours. He parked the van near a 24-hour service station, inhaling deeply as if the act of breathing itself could reassert his claim to normalcy. Inside, the cashier barely looked up, exchanging coins and receipts in the monotony of routine. Nathan envied that ignorance, that absence of awareness. They were safe precisely because they did not see, did not know. He envied their ordinary existence. Yet the forest and the night had left their indelible mark. The Polaroid remained in his jacket pocket, a constant reminder of surveillance and manipulation. The vial and bindings, harmless objects in daylight, became symbols of the terror that had unfolded, artifacts from a night that had tested his courage, reflexes, and morality. Nathan could not discard them, nor could he explain them without invoking disbelief. They existed in a liminal space where ordinary law and reason could not reach. Days turned into restless nights. Nathan avoided remote roads, avoided the forested stretches that once made his deliveries efficient. Even routine trips carried the weight of anxiety, every shadow in the corner of his vision a potential threat. He began to map escape routes, memorize every detour, rehearse responses to hypothetical attacks. Every action was filtered through a lens of caution, an overcompensation born of trauma. The attackers had taught him a brutal lesson. The world beyond daylight, beyond ordinary human observation, was neither predictable nor forgiving. He tried to speak to friends about the incident, but the words faltered. How could he describe the precision of the trap, the inevitability of the danger, without sounding delusional? Each time he attempted to recount the story, his listeners laughed nervously, suggested exhaustion, stress, or imagination. Nathan realized that the truth of the night, the orchestration, the psychological terror, the weaponization of kindness, was beyond comprehension for those untouched by it. The memory became his burden alone. Weeks later, Nathan discovered another subtle sign that the trap had left its mark. While inspecting the van after a routine maintenance check, he found faint scratches on the exterior, linear and precise, almost like claw marks. They did not correspond to the motorcycle, the axis, or any obvious source. It was as if the forest itself, or whatever had orchestrated the night, had left a reminder that vigilance must be perpetual. He understood, then, that his survival was temporary, conditional, and contingent on constant awareness. That night, Nathan sat alone in his apartment, the Polaroid pinned to the wall, the vial and bindings carefully stored in a drawer. The shadows in the room shifted as he moved, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of a distant clock, the occasional whisper of wind against the window, all feeling charged with potential menace. He knew he had survived by a narrow margin, by instinct and training, yet the memory was a living thing, growing with each retelling, each examination of the forest's dark embrace. The girl, the motorcycles, the trap, none of it could be fully explained. There was no justice, no closure, only the knowledge that his life had been observed, manipulated, and almost claimed in the dead of night. Nathan's conclusion was unavoidable. Decency, empathy, and instinct could be exploited. The night did not reward morality. It tested it, using human kindness as bait to measure reaction, resilience, and compliance. Those who survived did so not by virtue of morality, but by the calculated execution of reflex, intelligence, and sheer luck. And even as he slept, restlessly, with one eye half open, he felt it. The lingering presence of eyes watching, waiting. The forest was quiet, yes, but it had left its signature, a reminder that every act of kindness in darkness could cut both ways. Nathan Cole would never forget that night, the calculated horror of the red Fiat,